I appreciate everybody taking the time to come out tonight, particularly in the context of, kids moving up to college. I know it's a stressful time and there's a lot going on. And so I'm honored that you're here to hear my tips, and I really am going to do everything I can to be as helpful as possible. I just do want to, I think a lot of you probably are here because you know private prep, but just in case, really quickly, we're an education services company. In addition to executive functioning, which you're all going to hear about a bit tonight, we essentially help with anything at all related to school, right? And you've got the blurb there, right? But subject tutoring, college admissions, academic skills, so all of those things. And with that, we are off. As I sort of alluded to, right, there were huge changes that accompany the shift from high school to college. Chief among those is the facts that there are both less structure and more responsibility. And I just want to highlight a couple of ways that that's true. Probably it's obvious to you, but all the things that are going to flow through the rest of this conversation are in response to these two big ideas, right? So one of the things that happens, of course, when you go to college is that time is much less structured. High school takes up most of the day. And then as you all experienced, right, you've got the clubs and all the things after. And so the day really is filled, and you need to have time management skills so that you don't miss anything. But there's not a whole lot of needing to prioritize your time and make lots of decisions about what to do with that time, right? It's really structured for you. And that's hugely different in college, where it's about 15 hours of contact time. And most schools will say they expect you to spend 2 to 3 hours of your own time for every hour of contact time you have with a class, right? And so you just start to think about how to make that happen. And you need a little bit of a plan, right? And then the other piece is that the academics themselves are less structured, right? You'll go within your first week of class, you'll get your syllabi, they'll lay out all of your assignments, but it's not unusual for there to only be, 3 or 4 assignments that actually get turned in and graded. And you really need to then manage everything else on your own, right? No one's going to dock you if you don't do a reading, but if you don't do the reading for a number of days, you're going to find that you're behind on the essay you need to write, or not as prepared as you'd like to be for what might be 2 exams over the length of a course, right? And then the more responsibility piece, I think I already alluded to this idea of the academic responsibility, right? You really need to self-manage, and that involves a lot of active self-advocacy. Particularly if there's anyone here who had either an IEP or a 504 in place, those things are not going to automatically be put in place for you at most schools, right? You need to advocate for them yourself. But then also more responsibility socially, right? You're living with people who are not your family, and those relationships need to be managed. Those boundaries need to be managed. And there's a lot of navigating adulthood that happens there. Both around food and potentially grocery shopping and those sorts of things. And that flows right into also more responsibility for self-care, with just keeping yourself healthy, with things like sleep habits and exercise, the rest. All right, so everything we're getting into from here on out is going to be trying to help you manage all of that. One of the great things, there are many great things, but one of the great things about college campuses are the extensive supports that are put in place, right? And so part of a successful transition is knowing what those supports are and how to take advantage of them, right? So I'm going to just hit these big ones kind of quickly, but I highly recommend that anyone here take some time after this webinar and look at your campus map and really figure out where all of these things are. Make sure you know how to contact them. And some of them are going to have more services than those I list, right? Because every college is a little bit unique, right? So everybody's going to have an academic advisor. And hopefully, probably most of you have already met that person as you've been registering for your fall semester. That person is going to help make sure that you're hitting all of your gen ed requirements, that you're managing the pacing for your major once you declare it. Right now you have an advisor that may or may not be within the major you eventually declare, right? But they're really someone who's actually going to help you plan for hitting all of the academic requirements, right? Most colleges also will have peer tutors, right? And so these are people who are in advanced classes within a particular major and are there to help you. So if you have a gen ed requirement for science or math or foreign language that you're not particularly excited about, that you don't feel like is a strength of yours, peer tutoring is a really great way to make sure you get the support you need within that class. The Writing Center is another really important one. These are peers who are trained on the kind of writing that your particular college is interested in, right? And that they're trying to develop. It might be a different set of skills or a different way of writing than what you did in high school. And so I highly recommend that you go to the Writing Center for your first couple papers at the very least, to get advice and to get clarity around what the professors at your school are looking for. And then beyond that, it's also a really great way to just have someone else check your paper for minor mistakes, right? For the typos, for the grammatical errors and things of that nature, even if you're a strong writer. If you're less of a strong writer, this is going to be a great way to make sure that you are having an argument that's well structured, right? They're going to be able to give you a lot of feedback. Librarians are also a phenomenal resource. You will absolutely end up writing a research paper before you leave college, and very likely in your first semester. Getting the most out of the databases that you have access to is something that a librarian can teach you, right? They know how to use the keywords best. They know how to use the and or the or whatever the other things are, right? They know which database is most likely to provide the kind of information that you need for a given class. And so here in this case, you want to get yourself to the library, even though you can access the database from your room, and talk to the librarian at the start of writing an essay, right? When you're just at the point of gathering information. Office hours. This is, here I'm referring to office hours for each professor who teaches a class that you're taking. Take advantage of those. Build those relationships. Even if you don't have questions, go get to know them, right? If you're at a small school, it's going to be a great opportunity for the professor to give you more insight, again, about their expectations, about what they're looking for, to clarify ideas. If you're at a larger school, it's going to be a way for you to stand out, right? For the professor to know that you're paying attention to class and that you're invested. And in all of the cases, right? And this is something I tell high school students and college students alike. The more the professors see you outside of class, see you asking questions and engaging, the more likely they are to sort of give you the benefit of the doubt. If you're on the brink between one grade and another, if they know that you're invested, they're likely to go ahead and give you the better grade. So those relationships are incredibly important. Disability services. I know that doesn't apply to everyone, but as I alluded to a moment ago, if you get any kinds of accommodations, you want to visit disability services as soon as you get on campus. And in fact, if you haven't already reached out to them to find out what you need to do to get your accommodations in place, you want to do that tomorrow morning when you wake up. Career counseling might be early for that for some of you, and for some of you it won't be. This office, if you have an idea of the kinds of jobs that you're excited about, but don't know what that means in terms of what to study, or what classes to try out, or which departments to get to know, the Career Counseling Office is a great place to go and sort of talk about your passions, and they can help you align that with your program of study so that you're getting set up to eventually get a job that will align with those passions. And then this last one, it's a stretch to call this an academic support because you would have to make it happen, but I wanted to put it on here nonetheless. Study groups are a phenomenal way to hold yourself accountable in college, right? So that first couple weeks of class, if you get to know some people and you guys can agree on, hey, we're going to meet every Tuesday and go over this week's notes, that's fantastic. It's incredibly helpful. Getting the multiple perspectives and the different sets of strengths to support your learning is huge. And then I also have here just the idea of space. When you get to school, I would say before classes even start, during that orientation time, walk around campus and identify, I'm going to say 5 places that you can imagine studying that are not your dorm room, right? You're going to study in your dorm room some, but you might have a roommate that is keeping a different schedule than you. You might have a suite mate or a hall mate that's loud and it's hard for you to study. You might just be distracted in your own space. And it's really important to have lots of options about where you're going to go and find that you're able to be productive. And that's a good thing to just figure out early on. Cafes, student centers, the library, some schools will have study rooms. I work with a student that likes to practice in the acoustic rooms for singing. She'll go there and study. So all sorts of things work well. Okay, so those are the academic supports. Let us not forget about other supports, additional supports. Student Health Center is there on virtually every campus and is available to you. If you don't feel well, you can go. I think a lot of kids forget that those supports are there and kind of struggle through feeling miserable if they get sick. Don't do that, no need. Similarly, the Counseling Center, again, you might not feel inclined, you might be super inclined to go to get counseling, but I think it's worth saying here that it is extremely common for people to get to college and be dealing with something new, right? That in fact is the very definition of what's going on. And so using the Counseling Center as a place to talk through challenges that you're facing or ways that you're struggling to manage the transition, or, not being able to decide how to move forward with a course of study, right? These are big decisions and having that support there is huge. Deans, I made that plural on purpose. It's not a typo. Offices. This one is going to vary depending on the school, right? There are deans of students, depending on what the schools do. There are some schools that have like deans of the community and they oversee community service, right? But all of these offices are there to support your experience. And so these are great places to go to learn about how you can get involved in different activities or supports that might be unique to your particular school that are not on my list, to programs that are going on, concerts that they organize to come through your school, right? Lecture series, all of that is going to be through the dean's office. And then I also always highlight the registrar. This one's important for those of you that are, everybody probably going into your first semester. If you have any AP credits that are hopefully transferring into your school, you want to get to the registrar early, make sure that that got put into place, right? You don't want to think you have some number of credits and find out that the paperwork never went through correctly. And so you just want to start to have a relationship with the registrar. Adding and dropping classes is more common than I think a lot of people know. And so just knowing where that registrar is, getting yourself a little bit familiar with what forms they have, what are the dates for those add drop periods, or when is it that you can get a pass fail or not a pass fail. That only applies at some schools. But again, going there and just sort of talking with them about anything that they think you should know is a great move to do in that first week or two on campus where you're sort of orienting yourself. Okay. Those are all the supports. We're going to shift now to actually kind of some action steps that you can take regardless of what school you're going to make sure that you are organized. One of the things that I highly recommend is starting out by creating a zero balance time budget. This might be hard for you to do totally effectively right at the beginning. You can do it again halfway through the semester, but you basically want to start with a chart like the one I've got up here. And in that left-hand column, you want to list all of the things that are important to you to do. Include sleep, include self-care, include eating, include obviously your class time, your homework time, the clubs you want to do, if you want to rush a sorority or a fraternity, right? All of those things. And for each of those, estimate how long do you think you spend on that each week, right? Add it all up. If you're perfect, you're going to get 168 hours. Chances are that's not how it's going to work, right? Some of you are going to end up finding that there's a lot more time in the week than you have plans for. And some of you are going to end up finding that if you were to do everything you hope, you would end up with something like negative 40 hours in a week. But either way, this is a great place to start with prioritizing how you're going to spend your time and really thinking about what you want out of your college experience and what you're going to give the most time to, right? Fiddle with those numbers until you get to that 168, right? If you find that it's actually almost impossible for you to estimate, Toggl there, Toggl, no E, also not a typo, is a fantastic app to just track your time. You can create a couple different projects and just hit start when you start a new project. And you could do that for the first week or so and get a sense of where your time is going so that you can then make informed decisions about how to prioritize it. All right. Next step then, once you have that zero balance time budget, is to create a version of an ideal week, right? And so you've got that list of all the things you want to do. Think of kind of grouping some things together, right? You might have a category titled self-care that includes eating, sleeping, and basic hygiene, right? Like showering, brushing your hair, etc. And you kind of want to get not loads of categories. No category should have less than 10 hours a week in it. And just lay it out in your week in a way that feels like you would like that week, right? So obviously you've got your classes, please put them on there first, right? You're going to class every day, all the time, and then start to put in the other pieces so that you kind of can say, this is what I'm going to aim for. And it's not meant to be, this is exactly how I'm going to do it. And if I get to my self-care time 15 minutes late, I've got a big problem. But it is so you can see, oh, this was study time. And instead I'm going to a concert. I need to think about, do I need to move that study time to an earlier part of the day? Am I super caught up on my work and it's not at all a problem? This is a reward I get for getting ahead of the game. But it gives you the power essentially to make informed choices about your time, right? So that's beautiful. A couple things on my bullets there. freecollegeschedulemaker.com is the website I used to make that little visual. Highly recommend making a similar visual. You can pick your colors, print it out, put it by your workspace, just again, so that you have a constant reminder of what you're trying to do and how you can live your priorities. The other thing I want to highlight here that you might not think to include, definitely every week include a little bit of time to plan and to adjust. I'll talk later about why that's so important, but it is. And when you lay out your study time, right? That's the time outside of class that you're going to be engaged in your academics. It's really a great idea to think about short-term study time and long-term study time. The short-term study time is the reading that's due next period, the problem set that's due tomorrow, right? Sort of those daily assignments. The long-term study time is everything else you need to do to be successful. And we're going to spend the next couple slides talking about what that long-term study time can be used for. All right. So one can be just using your syllabi, right? First week of school, you're going to get your syllabi from all your classes. Some of that long-term study time should absolutely go to just sitting there with your syllabi, plugging all of the assignments, all of the major due dates into a calendar, a planner, on a whiteboard, whatever system it is. But really using those syllabi so that you don't get caught off guard. Read the whole thing, right? Notice the different percentages that are given to different aspects of those assignments so that you, again, can start to think about how you're prioritizing. If your midterm and your final make up 75% of your grade, right? And the daily homework plus the essay you have to write are only 25%, that should dictate the way you distribute your time. So that's one way to use your long-term assignment time. Another one is to clarify gaps in knowledge. Your syllabi are almost always going to have a list of topics that are covered each week. If you look at those lists and you find, I feel a little shaky on one of these topics, or you leave a class and you know that concept, that formula really didn't make it into my brain, this is good time to self-advocate. Go to those office hours, sit down with a classmate, watch a YouTube video, whatever it is, so that you can clarify that gap in knowledge. Research is long-term study time. You need to research before you can write in the vast majority of the cases. Interacting with supports, we talked about all of those. And then actually writing the papers and doing the studying is also long-term study time, because very rarely is it, a professor introduces an essay or an exam on a Monday and you're taking it or turning it in on a Wednesday, right? Those are long-term assignments that usually will go about actually half a semester. And that leads us right into study habits, right? College is not a place, for the most part, there will be exceptions, let's be clear, but for the most part, it's not a place where you're going to have a weekly quiz that easily dictates to you, how am I doing? It's not going to be that you have unit tests and then you don't need to come back to that material. It's going to tend to be cumulative exams that happen just a couple times throughout the semester and that you really just need to prepare yourself for, right? And so when we think about study habits, the idea here is that throughout the course of a semester, you want to be creating and strengthening multiple pathways to the information. The more ways you can interact with an information, the easier it becomes for your brain to access that information, right? So you're in class, you hear the lecture, let's assume you understand it. That's one pathway you're creating, right? The auditory. If you're taking notes, you're automatically creating another pathway. If you go home to your dorm, and review those notes by reorganizing them, we're creating yet another pathway, right? And so the more we can kind of just create habits that re-expose us to the information, the more we're studying throughout the course of the semester and really learning the material, as opposed to trying to do the thing where you cram a week before, right? And so this chart I've got up here shows a little bit of how that actually works. This is built around a concept called Ebbinghaus's curve. There was a lot of research done to look at how our brains let go of information, forget it, right? And what we can do to mitigate that. So this, I'm going to call it purple, royal blue line is the line right when you leave that first lecture, right? And so you'll notice that at the moment when you were just exposed to the information, you have not retained all of it. And that's partially because our attention spans are shorter than the classes. And so chances are, if you were in a class for an hour, you spaced out for a couple minutes, right? It's not any problem on you. That's just the way our brains work. It's also possible that something in that class didn't make total sense to you, right? This is why we're clarifying information. And so we go to class and we start forgetting. Ideally, what you're going to do is that same day, as close to right after that class as possible, review the information in some way. That's the red line. Great. That gets us up to 100%. We clarify anything we didn't get. We start forgetting again, but a little less, right? The yellow line, you want to look again the next day, right? This pacing, based on neuroscience, right? So right after we're exposed to the information, 24 hours later is the yellow line. A week later is the green line. Those ones are pretty easy to manage. So that's usually where I tell people to try and have a system. Great way to do the green line is to have something that you do every week with that week's notes, right? Create a one-pager, go through and color code it, whatever your system is. But you can see if you do those exposures that I just suggested, come the end of the semester, you're already at over 50% retention. And so studying is a lot less of a lift than if you were to do nothing, a la purple line, right? Or even just review once, a la red line. So we want to study over lots of sessions. You want to be active. Reading your notes and not doing anything with them does not count. You need to be rewriting them. You need to be connecting them to an imagery. You need to be talking about them with a classmate. Something else needs to occur, right? And the prove it idea here is when you think you've got it, when you think you're ready to sit for a test, you need to prove it. You can't just say, I feel pretty good, right? You need to put the notes away and try to define all the terms, or you need to likewise put the notes away and try to write the essay or whatever the thing is. Prove it, prove it, prove it. Beautiful. Now we're back to that reflection and planning time. Doesn't need to be 3 hours a week, right? But this is important partially because we want to recognize up front that there are going to be lots of iterations. You're going to have to try lots of different things to find systems that work for you in college, to figure out where you study the best, to figure out when you study the best, how you study the best, what kinds of classes you like the most, what your priorities actually are. And setting aside right now 30 minutes a week to reflect on how things are going recognizes that it's okay if they're not perfect on your first shot, right? It's a process that you're going to engage in and be committed to. And so during that time, you want to check in on your goals, right? I assumed right there that you have goals. I know that you do. If you haven't concretized them yet, if you haven't said them out loud or written them down, do it, right? And think about not just academic goals. You want those, right? But think also about personal goals, social goals, right? All of these things are new in college. And so when you do that checking in, check in on all of it. You want to update your calendar or your planner. Again, here I'm assuming that you have one. You need one. Google Calendar will do if you're not willing to engage in something else. It does a really great job. A paper planner will work. A whiteboard on your wall will work. Any of those things will work. But you want to update it, right? And you might be updating it with social events that you didn't know about at the start of the semester. You might be updating it with adjustments that your professor made to the pacing of a particular assignment. But you want to have something that is a record of everything you know that's going on, because you've got to manage a lot, right? And you want to have it written down. Again, part of the reason we write it down, right, is we're externalizing information. If you try to keep it in your head, you're actually wasting short-term memory, so that all of your studying and all of your paying attention and all of the work you're doing will become less efficient, right? So it's not a write it down because Jenna said so and every adult you've ever spoken to says that planning is important, but it's actually an aid for all the rest of the stuff you're doing as well. You want to look ahead at that planning time. What does this week look like? Right? Is there a day where you're not going to have as much study time as you normally want? Is there a day where you need to plan to get up a little earlier? Recognize that so you don't get caught off guard. Is there a day where you double booked? Can you fix it? Right? And so that look ahead is super important. I already talked about assessing all parts of yourself. I'm doing well with time because we started at 7:33. I have 1 more minute and I'm going to talk real quickly about the role of parents. And then I'll take everybody's questions. So I imagine there are some parents here. I talked for the past 29 minutes to the kids. I just want to acknowledge that it is difficult to be a parent with a child going off to college. I've not done it, but I can recognize that there's a lot of challenges there. So I think I just want to say that the role that the parents have here to really support their students, right? Because you can't be the direct support you've been for the past 17 or 18 years. Understand the campus resources. So if your child reaches out to you and doesn't know some of what I just said or forgot it, because they inevitably will, you can remind them of all the things that are in place to make their life easier and to help them problem solve. Beautiful lead into my next bullet, which is to encourage problem solving. Ask questions that are, why do you think that's happening? What can you do to solve it? Is there anyone that can help you, right? Prompt the kind of thinking that will lead your kids to solving their own problems. And then also, parents, make a plan for yourself. How often are you going to call? What seems like the right thing to do? How often are you going to visit, right? Try to nail those things down now based on your values and what kind of experience you want your child to have over the next semester. It'll be harder to separate the emotions of missing them from the things that you want for them once they're off. So question time.
That was amazing. And in 30 minutes, that's all I can say. That was really impressive. Yeah, please put your questions. Oh, perfect.
I see. Can I talk about study groups? I can. So study groups, some schools are going to actually have study groups that are set up, right? And so for a lot of the freshman classes, they might have a freshman study group that meets at particular times. For any of those gen eds that everyone's going to hit their first semester, Some won't, and some of the classes you're taking won't be those classes. But in my experience, almost all college students that I've worked with appreciate a study group. So if you just ask a couple people in a class, they'll tend to want to do it, right? Because in those freshman classes, everyone's in the same experience, everyone's trying to figure it out together, and studying is more fun, not by yourself. And as I said earlier, it's also a great way to hold yourself accountable. I've also seen dorm-based study groups, right, where people will sort of all just get together and they're studying at the same time in the common room in a dorm building. So it varies class to class and school to school, but getting a group of, 2, 3, I would say as large as 5 people together on a regular basis is extremely helpful. I think probably we can say goodnight. I can hang for a minute or two, but we can stop the recording.